Zara Whitfield, 28, stared at the loan officer across the mahogany desk, her hands trembling as she held the document. This mortgage for $523,000 is in your name, Miss Whitfield. The payments are 6 months delinquent. Her parents' betrayal crashed over her like a tidal wave. The perfect family she thought she had was built on a foundation of lies, and now their financial fraud threatened to destroy her future completely. Before I dive into the most devastating betrayal of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had family members who weren't quite what they seemed. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this wild ride through my family's dark secrets and the sweet justice that finally came my way. Growing up in Maplewood, Connecticut, I never questioned the picture-perfect family narrative my parents had constructed. My father, Richard Whitfield, was a respected investment banker, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, maintaining that commanding presence that made other parents at school events slightly intimidated. My mother, Eleanor, played her role as the quintessential upper-middle-class housewife with precision charity committee meetings, tennis at the country club, and hostessing dinner parties where she'd serve her famous coq au vin, while laughing melodically at the right moments. Our colonial-style house, with its pristine white columns and manicured lawn, was featured twice in the local Homes of Distinction magazine. Every Christmas, we'd pose for professional family portraits in coordinated outfits, images that would later be sent out as holiday cards to remind everyone in our social circle just how perfect the Whitfields were. Family loyalty above all else, my father would often declare during our Sunday dinners. This wasn't just a saying in our household, it was practically a commandment. The world out there is full of people who will take advantage of you, Zara. But family always has your back. I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? I was their only child, the recipient of what appeared to be unwavering support and love. When I got accepted to Brown University, they threw an extravagant party, inviting practically everyone they knew. My father made a toast about how I was the Whitfield legacy and how proud they were of my achievements. The financial dynamics of our family seemed straightforward to me. My parents paid for my education, our gift to you, they called it. They encouraged me to focus on my studies rather than work during college. Your job is to excel, Zara. Let us handle the rest. When I graduated with honors in economics, they presented me with a new car, a white BMW that my mother said suited a young professional of your caliber. After graduation, I moved to Boston and secured a position at a consulting firm. My parents seemed supportive of my independence, though they called frequently and always seemed intensely interested in my financial situation. "Are you setting up good credit, sweetheart?" my mother would ask. "It's so important to establish yourself early." My father was more direct. "You should apply for these credit cards. They have excellent rewards programs." He even offered to help me organize my financial documents, suggesting I give him copies of my Social Security card and birth certificate for safekeeping. At the time, these conversations seemed like normal parental concern. I even felt grateful that they were so invested in helping me build my financial future. When they suggested I add them as authorized users on my first credit card in case of emergencies, I didn't hesitate. After all, they had given me so much. What was a little financial interconnection between family members who trusted each other completely? In Boston, I thrived professionally, but kept close ties to home visiting at least once a month for those continuing Sunday dinners. During one such visit, when I was 25, my parents floated the idea that I might want to purchase an investment property. "Real estate is the foundation of wealth building," my father explained over dessert. "And with your excellent credit score, you'd qualify for great rates." "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of commitment," I replied, cutting into my slice of cheesecake. "I'm still settling into my career." My mother reached over and patted my hand. Sometimes opportunities come before we feel fully prepared, darling. That's when family can step in to guide you. Little did I know that this conversation wasn't hypothetical guidance. It was the groundwork for what would become the greatest betrayal of my life. When I announced my engagement to Marcus 2 years later, my parents seemed oddly reserved. Marcus came from a middle-class background in Michigan, worked as an environmental engineer, and had none of the social connections my parents valued. Their lukewarm response hurt, but I attributed it to normal adjustment pains. They'll warm up to him, I told myself. They just need time. But when Marcus, with his practical Midwestern sensibilities, started asking questions about our financial future, things began to unravel faster than I could have imagined. "Have you checked your credit report recently?" he asked one evening, as we discussed wedding costs in my apartment. We should both know where we stand before combining finances. "I'm sure mine is fine," I said confidently. My parents helped me set everything up. Marcus looked at me with concern. "Zara, you should still check. It's basic financial hygiene." To humor him, I pulled up my credit report that night while he was in the shower. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, listed under my name, was a mortgage for a property in Westport, Connecticut, a property I'd never heard of, let alone purchased. The loan amount was staggering, $523,000. My first thought was identity theft. My second thought was much, much worse. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the credit report, the blue light of my laptop illuminating my face in the darkened bedroom. Marcus was still in the shower, the sound of running water creating white noise that couldn't drown out the pounding of my heart. The mortgage had been opened 3 years ago, right around the time I had moved to Boston and started my career. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered to myself, desperately clicking through the details. But there it was, plain as day. A $500,000 loan, with my name attached to it for a property with an address I didn't recognize in Westport, an affluent coastal town about 20 miles from my parents' house. When Marcus emerged from the bathroom towel, wrapped around his waist and hair still dripping, he found me frozen in place, staring at the screen. "Zara, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't even form words at first, just turned the screen toward him. He sat beside me, water droplets from his hair spattering onto my shoulder as he leaned in to look. "Holy shit," he murmured, eyes widening. Did you buy a house I don't know about?" "No." The word came out as a strangled cry. "I've never even heard of this property. I never signed for any mortgage." Marcus's face hardened as he studied the report more carefully. "When was the last time you checked your credit?" I shook my head, a wave of shame washing over me. "I never have. My parents always said they were taking care of everything." The moment the words left my mouth, a terrible suspicion began to form. Marcus saw it too. I could tell by the way his expression shifted from confusion to grim understanding. "Call them," he said quietly. "Right now." My father answered on the third ring, his voice cheery and slightly distracted. "Zara, wonderful to hear from you, sweetheart. Your mother and I were just discussing your wedding menu. She thinks seafood might be too risky for an outdoor reception, but—" Dad," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to ask you something important. Do you know anything about a mortgage for a property in Westport under my name?" The silence that followed was brief but deafening. "Why don't I put you on speaker so your mother can join us?" he finally said, his tone shifting subtly. Moments later, I heard my mother's voice, artificially bright. "Darling, what's this about a mortgage?" I took a deep breath, Marcus's hand finding mine and squeezing it supportively. "There's a $523,000 mortgage on my credit report for a property in Westport. I never bought a house there. I never signed for any loan, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on." Another silence, then my mother's nervous laugh. "Oh dear, is that showing up already? We were going to talk to you about that." Eleanor, my father's voice cut in sharply. Richard, she's found out. We might as well explain. My mother's voice turned, coaxing as she addressed me. Zara, sweetheart, it's not what it seems. That property is actually an investment for your future. We just put it in your name because the interest rates were better that way. The casual way she admitted to what was essentially identity theft made my stomach turn. You took out a mortgage in my name without telling me. Is that even legal? Don't be so dramatic, my father chided. We've made every payment until recently. The market's been tough and we've had some temporary cash flow issues, but it's all going to be sorted out. Recently, I echoed, scrolling back to the report. This says the loan is 6 months delinquent. My credit score has dropped almost 200 points. These things happen in real estate, my father replied dismissively. The property has appreciated considerably. Once we sell it, everything will be fine. Better than fine, you'll thank us. I was speechless, unable to reconcile this conversation with the parents I thought I knew. Marcus took the phone from my hand. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, he said, his voice controlled but tight with anger. What you've done is fraud. You've committed identity theft against your own daughter. My father's tone turned icy. This is a family matter, Marcus. With all due respect, you wouldn't understand how these things work in certain circles. I understand the law, Marcus shot back. And this isn't about circles. This is about you potentially destroying Zara's financial future. My mother's voice turned pleading. Zara, tell your fiancé to calm down. We did this for you. The property will eventually be yours anyway. We just need a little time to get caught up on the payments. I found my voice again, though it sounded foreign to my own ears. How did you even do this? I never signed any mortgage documents. You signed a power of attorney form, remember, my father said. 3 years ago when you were setting up your move to Boston. You said you trusted us to handle things while you were getting established. The memory hit me like a truck. I had signed several documents my father had prepared, barely skimming them because, well, this was my father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my college graduation, who had always told me that family loyalty came above all else. That power of attorney was for helping me set up utilities and deal with my apartment lease, I said shakily. Not for buying property in my name. The language was quite broad, actually, my father replied, his banker's precision coming through. Perfectly legal. Like I said, this is all going to work out. Legal or not, it was a betrayal, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. How could you do this to me? Oh, for heaven's sake, my mother sighed. We didn't do anything to you. We did it for you. And frankly, Zara, after all, we've given you the education, the car, the connections, a little assistance with our temporary financial situation seems like a reasonable expectation. I ended the call shortly after, unable to process more of their justifications. Marcus held me as I sobbed my entire understanding of my family crumbling around me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made an appointment with the bank that held the mortgage. The truth, as I would soon discover, was even worse than I had imagined. The Gateway Mortgage office in downtown Boston was all gleaming glass and polished wood, designed to convey stability and trustworthiness. As I sat across from Diane Palmer, a senior loan officer with sympathetic eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, I felt anything but stable. Miss Whitfield, I've reviewed your file, she said, glancing at her computer screen before returning her attention to me. The mortgage for the Westport property was indeed executed using a power of attorney. We have the documentation on file. My throat tightened. Can I see it? She turned her monitor so I could view the scanned document. There it was. My signature on the power of attorney form dated 3 years ago, giving Richard and Eleanor Whitfield broad authority to act on my behalf in financial matters. Below that was another document, the mortgage application itself, signed by my father as my attorney, in fact. Did no one question why I wasn't present for such a major transaction, I asked, hearing the desperation in my voice. Diane's expression was carefully neutral. With a legally executed power of attorney, your physical presence wasn't required. The documents appeared to be in order. Marcus, sitting beside me, leaned forward. But the payments have stopped. What happens now? Diane's professional composure slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern. The loan is significantly delinquent. If payments aren't resumed, foreclosure proceedings will begin within 30 days. Unfortunately, Miss Whitfield, as the borrower of record, this would have severe consequences for your credit and financial standing. The room seemed to tilt slightly. But I never wanted this mortgage. I was deceived by my own parents. I understand, and I'm truly sorry about your situation, Diane said. However, from the bank's perspective, this is a valid loan that requires repayment. What are our options? Marcus asked. Diane outlined several possibilities. None of them good. I could assume responsibility for the delinquent mortgage, and either try to sell the property quickly or start making the monthly payments of $3,275. I could let the house go into foreclosure and suffer the credit consequences. Or I could pursue legal action against my parents for fraud, which might eventually clear my name but would take years and considerable legal fees. I need to see this house, I said, suddenly surprising even myself. I need to see what my parents thought was worth destroying my financial future for. The drive to Westport took just under 2 hours. Neither Marcus nor I spoke much, the weight of betrayal filling the car more thoroughly than any conversation could. The GPS directed us to a tree-lined street of substantial homes, each set back on carefully landscaped lots. The property, my property, according to the fraudulent mortgage, was a gray-blue colonial with white trim and a wraparound porch. It's locked, Marcus said after trying the front door. I peered through the windows and saw nothing. No furniture, no curtains, no signs of life. Just empty rooms with hardwood floors and fresh paint. It's staged, I murmured, like it's ready to be sold. We walked around to the back of the house where a realtor's lockbox hung on the doorknob. On impulse, I tried my birth date as the code, then my parents' anniversary. Neither worked. Try your social security number, Marcus suggested. Last 4 digits. The lock clicked open. Inside the house was even more obviously staged, a few pieces of generic furniture arranged in the main living areas, but most rooms completely empty. In what appeared to be the master bedroom, I found a stack of mail addressed to my parents. Recent mail. They've been living here, I said, flipping through envelopes. Or at least using this as some kind of address. In the kitchen, Marcus discovered a drawer full of financial documents. As we spread them across the granite countertop, a disturbing picture emerged. The Westport property wasn't the only asset my parents had acquired using my identity. There were statements for credit cards I'd never applied for with balances in the tens of thousands of dollars. Investment accounts. Even a business loan for something called Whitfield Enterprises, LLC, Zara Marcus said, quietly holding up a document. Your parents filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago, under their own names. Suddenly, it all made horrible sense. My parents had encountered financial trouble, declared bankruptcy to clear their own debts, and then used my pristine credit to rebuild their lifestyle. The temporary cash flow issues my father had mentioned weren't temporary at all. They were the result of years of financial mismanagement. I sank onto a kitchen stool, overcome by the magnitude of their deception. The perfect family, the generous parents, the constant talk of family loyalty, it had all been manipulation designed to keep me trusting and compliant, while they systematically destroyed my financial future. I have to confront them in person, I said, standing up with sudden resolve. Not over the phone, face to face. Are you sure that's a good idea? Marcus asked, concern etched on his face. No, I admitted, but I need answers. and I need to see their faces when they try to justify this. The drive to my parents' home in Maplewood took another 40 minutes. Every familiar landmark we passed felt like a mockery of my childhood memories. The perfect facade of the Whitfield family home seemed sinister now rather than welcoming. My mother answered the door, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. Zara. And Marcus. This is unexpected. We need to talk, I said, walking past her into the foyer. Where's Dad? In his study, but he's on a call. I didn't wait for her to finish striding through the house with Marcus close behind. I found my father at his desk, not on a call at all, but rather studying what appeared to be real estate listings. Zara, he said, quickly minimizing the window on his computer. This is a surprise. We just came from the Westport house, I said without preamble, and we found all the documentation. The credit cards, the business loan, everything. Why, Dad? Why would you do this to me? My father's expression hardened the mask of the loving parent, disappearing entirely. Sit down, both of you. Let's discuss this like adults. I don't think adults commit identity theft against their children, Marcus said, remaining standing beside me. My mother appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. Richard, perhaps we should call our lawyer before this conversation goes any further. We don't need a lawyer to talk to our daughter, my father snapped. Then, turning to me, his tone softened in that manipulative way I now recognized all too clearly. Zara, you have to understand. After the financial crisis, many of my investments collapsed. We were facing complete ruin. So you filed for bankruptcy, I said, and then decided to ruin me instead. We were protecting the family legacy, my father's voice rose. Everything we built over generations gone because of one market downturn. I couldn't allow that. And your credit? It was a resource. A way to rebuild. A resource, I echoed, disbelieving. I'm your daughter, not a line of credit. And as our daughter, don't you think you owe us something, my mother interjected. After all we've done for you, the audacity of the question left me momentarily speechless. Marcus stepped forward. What you've done, he said coldly, is commit multiple felonies. Wire fraud, identity theft, mortgage fraud, the list goes on. My father stood his imposing height, once so reassuring to a little girl, now menacing. You think we're afraid of threats? Go ahead, call the police. Tell them how your parents, who paid for your education, who gave you every advantage, used your credit to maintain the lifestyle you benefited from your entire life. See how much sympathy you get. This isn't about sympathy, I said, finding strength I didn't know I had. This is about right and wrong. And what you did was wrong. Criminally wrong. We're your parents, my mother said, as if that explained and excused everything. Not anymore, I replied, the words cutting through me even as I spoke them. You stopped being my parents the moment you decided your financial comfort was more important than my future. I turned to leave, but my father's next words stopped me cold. Walk out that door and we'll sell the Westport property tomorrow, to the lowest bidder. Your credit will be ruined beyond repair. I looked back at him, at the stranger wearing my father's face. My credit is already ruined, but I'm not. I'll rebuild my financial life without using anyone else's identity to do it. As Marcus and I walked to the car, my mother called after us, her voice breaking. Zara, please, family loyalty above all else. Remember, I paused, turning to face the house I had once called home. That's the thing about loyalty, Mom. It's supposed to go both ways. The Middlesex County Courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade, a monument to justice that felt both reassuring and intimidating. Marcus squeezed my hand as we climbed the steps, my attorney Victoria Chen walking slightly ahead of us, her leather briefcase swinging rhythmically with each step. Remember what we discussed, Victoria said as we paused at the entrance. Stick to the facts. Don't let emotions overwhelm you on the stand, even if their attorney tries to provoke you. The documentation speaks for itself. I nodded, smoothing down my navy blue blazer, an outfit Victoria had suggested for its professional, sympathetic appearance. 3 months had passed since the confrontation at my parents' house. 3 months of legal consultations, police reports, credit bureau disputes, and sleepless nights. The criminal investigation was ongoing, but today's hearing was for the civil restraining order I was seeking against my parents, a first step in what promised to be a long legal journey. Inside the courtroom, I saw them immediately. My mother dressed in a conservative cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her hair perfectly styled. My father imposing in charcoal gray, his expression unreadable. Beside them sat their attorney, Lawrence Geller, known throughout Connecticut as the lawyer wealthy people hired when they needed problems to disappear. They didn't look at me as we took our seats on the opposite side of the room, but I could feel their presence like a physical weight on my chest. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Rosario entered the courtroom. The proceedings began with formal introductions, and Victoria outlining the reason for our petition: a financial restraining order to prevent Richard and Eleanor Whitfield from accessing my credit using my identity or contacting financial institutions in my name. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice clear and confident. "My client discovered that her parents fraudulently obtained a $523,000 mortgage in her name, opened multiple credit card accounts without her knowledge, and even established a business entity using her Social Security number. We have documentation of all these activities and are prepared to demonstrate that these actions constitute a clear pattern of identity theft and financial abuse." Lawrence Geller rose smoothly in response. "Your Honor, this is a private family matter that has been grossly mischaracterized by Miss Whitfield and her counsel. My clients have only ever acted in their daughter's best interest, making investments on her behalf that would ultimately benefit her. There was no intent to defraud." Judge Rosario's expression remained neutral. "Intent will be a matter for the criminal proceedings, Mr. Geller. Today's hearing is to determine if a financial restraining order is warranted based on the evidence presented." As Victoria began presenting our evidence, the fraudulent mortgage documents, the credit card statements, the business filings, I watched my parents' faces. My mother maintained a mask of injured dignity, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though no actual tears appeared. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as if by sheer force of will he could make this all go away. Then it was my turn to testify. As I took the stand and swore to tell the truth, I felt a strange calm descend over me. Here in this room, dedicated to facts and evidence, the emotional manipulation that had defined my relationship with my parents held no power. Victoria led me through a series of questions about when and how I discovered the fraud, my subsequent conversations with my parents, and the impact on my financial status. "And what is your current credit score, Miss Whitfield?" she asked. "It was 802 before this happened," I replied. "It's now 583 due to the delinquent mortgage and maxed out credit cards in my name." "And has this affected other areas of your life?" I nodded. "I've had to postpone my wedding because we can no longer qualify for the venue loan. I was denied a lease on a new apartment. I've even had job opportunities impacted because many employers now run credit checks as part of their background screening." When it was Lawrence Geller's turn to cross-examine me, his approach was exactly what Victoria had warned me about: an attempt to make me appear ungrateful, entitled, and vindictive. "Miss Whitfield, your parents paid for your education at Brown University, did they not?" he asked. "They did," I acknowledged. "An education that costs approximately $80,000 per year, totaling around $320,000 for your degree. They also purchased you a BMW upon graduation, provided connections that helped you secure your current position, and never asked for repayment of any kind. Is that correct?" I could feel the trap being set, but answered honestly. "Yes, they did those things." And now, when they've experienced financial difficulties and attempted to create investments that would ultimately benefit you as their only heir, you respond by taking them to court and pursuing criminal charges. Victoria stood. Immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is characterizing identity theft and mortgage fraud as investments and attempting to normalize criminal behavior. Sustained Judge Rosario nodded. Mr. Geller, please stick to factual questions. Geller adjusted his approach but continued trying to paint me as the villain, suggesting that I had known about or even tacitly approved my parents' actions by signing the power of attorney and not regularly checking my credit. Report. Isn't it true, he pressed, that you've maintained regular contact with your parents throughout your adult life, visiting monthly, speaking weekly, by phone, and never once expressing concern about how they were managing the financial arrangements you authorized them to handle? I authorized them to help set up utilities for my first apartment, I clarified. Not to take out a $500,000 mortgage or open credit cards in my name. But you never checked, he insisted. For 3 years, you never once verified what was being done with the broad financial powers you granted them. Some might say that suggests either knowledge or negligence on your part. I took a deep breath, remembering Victoria's advice to stay calm. I never checked because they were my parents, and I trusted them completely. I believed them when they said family loyalty came above all else. I didn't realize that loyalty only went one way. Throughout my testimony, I avoided looking directly at my parents, focusing instead on answering the questions truthfully and clearly. But during a brief recess, I couldn't help but notice my mother attempting to approach me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Zara, she called softly, her eyes brimming with tears that seemed to materialize on command. Please, darling, can't we talk about this privately? This is so unnecessary, airing our family business in public this way. Victoria stepped between us immediately. Mrs. Whitfield, my client, has no interest in speaking with you. Any communication should go through counsel. My father appeared behind my mother, his hand on her shoulder. You're making a terrible mistake, he said, his voice low. When this is over, you'll have nothing. No family, no inheritance, no connections. We can still fix this if you drop these proceedings now. Marcus, who had been getting water from a nearby fountain, returned to my side. Mr. Whitfield, with all due respect, the only mistake Zara made was trusting you. And she's already lost her family. You took that from her when you decided to commit fraud in her name. You, my father snarled, pointing at Marcus. This is your doing. You've poisoned her against us. That's enough, Victoria said firmly. One more word, and I'll report this conversation to Judge Rosario as witness intimidation. We returned to the courtroom, the brief encounter, leaving me shaken but even more determined. The rest of the hearing continued with testimony from the mortgage broker who had processed the loan subpoenaed to appear, and an identity theft expert who detailed the extensive damage done to my financial standing. You know, it's moments like these in my story where I really felt alone against the world. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're finding this journey as wild as it was living through it, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family secrets and the strength it takes to stand up for yourself. Now let me tell you what happened next, because believe me, this is where things really start to get interesting. When Judge Rosario finally delivered her ruling, her words cut through the tension in the courtroom like a knife. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court grants the petitioner's request for a financial restraining order against Richard and Eleanor Whitfield. They are hereby prohibited from accessing Zara Whitfield's credit information, contacting financial institutions in her name, or engaging in any transactions using her identity. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution. She looked directly at my parents, her expression stern. The court is particularly troubled by the systematic nature of this identity theft and the exploitation of the parent-child relationship. Miss Whitfield placed her trust in you as her parents, and you abused that trust in a manner that has caused significant financial and emotional harm. My mother let out a small gasp while my father's face flushed with anger. Lawrence Geller immediately began whispering to them, no doubt already planning their appeal. As we left the courthouse, Victoria was cautiously optimistic. This is just the first step, but it's a significant one. The restraining order prevents them from doing any further damage to your credit. Now we focus on the criminal case and civil litigation to recover damages. How long will all that take? I asked, suddenly feeling exhausted. Honestly, it could be years, she admitted. But today was a good day. The judge saw through their attempts to normalize what they did. That will help with the criminal proceedings. Marcus put his arm around me as we walked to the car. You were amazing in there. Standing up to them, telling the truth despite all their manipulation, I leaned against him, grateful for his unwavering support. I still can't believe any of this is happening. 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect family. Perfect is overrated, he said gently. Real is better. And now you know what's real. That night, back in our small Boston apartment that we'd been forced to keep due to my credit situation, I received a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. Family protects its own one way or another. Dad, I showed it to Marcus, who immediately called Victoria. She instructed us to save the message as evidence of continued harassment and potential threats. Tomorrow, we'll amend the restraining order to include all forms of contact, she said. For tonight, document everything and don't respond. After the call ended, I sat on our bed, staring at the message. The words, "family protects its own," now seemed darkly ironic. My parents hadn't protected me, they had sacrificed my future to preserve their lifestyle. And they still didn't see anything wrong with what they'd done. Are you okay? Marcus asked, sitting beside me. Not really, I admitted, but I will be, eventually. What I didn't know then was that my parents had no intention of accepting defeat, and that the legal victory we'd achieved that day was just the beginning of a much more complicated battle, one that would ultimately reveal secrets beyond what I'd already discovered. 2 weeks after the restraining order was granted, I received a call from Victoria while at work. Zara, there's been a development, she said, her normally composed voice tinged with concern. Your parents have listed the Westport property for sale. I stepped away from my desk, finding a quiet corner in the office kitchen. Can they do that? The mortgage is in my name. Technically, no. But they're trying to do it anyway, using the power of attorney. I've already filed an emergency motion to block the sale, but there's something else you should know. She paused. The listing price is $975,000. If they succeed in selling it, that's significantly more than the mortgage amount. My mind raced. So they're trying to pocket the difference before the criminal charges come through. That would be my guess, Victoria confirmed. They're attempting to liquidate assets. I've also received a notice that they've put their primary residence in Maplewood on the market as well. They're running, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They know the criminal charges are coming, and they're planning to disappear with whatever money they can gather. It certainly looks that way. I've alerted the district attorney's office, but without formal charges filed, yet there's not much they can do to prevent your parents from selling their own property or traveling. After the call ended, I sat in the kitchen, ignoring curious glances from coworkers. My parents, the people who had raised me, who had seemed so perfect and proper my entire life, were planning to become fugitives rather than face the consequences of their actions. The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. That evening, Marcus suggested we drive by the Westport property to see if there was any activity. When we arrived, a realtor was just finishing up what appeared to be an open house, removing signs from the front yard. "Excuse me," I approached her. "I'm interested in this property, but I have some concerns about the title." The realtor, a polished woman in her 50s with an expensive haircut, smiled brightly. "Oh, the title is clear. The Whitfields have owned this property for 3 years." "The Whitfields," I echoed, my stomach dropping. "I'm Zara Whitfield. This mortgage is in my name, but I never bought this house. My parents committed identity theft." Her smile faltered. I... I'm not sure I understand." "My parents took out a mortgage in my name without my knowledge or consent," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "There's a court order preventing them from selling this property." The realtor's professional demeanor crumbled, replaced by genuine alarm. I had no idea. They seemed like such a respectable couple. "They told me their daughter, you, I suppose, had authorized them to sell on your behalf. They showed you a power of attorney document, didn't they?" She nodded. "Yes, it all seemed in order." "That power of attorney has been legally revoked," Marcus interjected. "We can provide you with court documentation." By the time we left, the realtor had agreed to halt all marketing activities pending legal verification, looking visibly shaken by the revelation that she'd nearly become an unwitting accomplice to fraud. Back at home, I received another call from Victoria. "The emergency motion was granted," she reported. "Your parents are legally barred from attempting to sell the Westport property. But there's something else you should know. I've been contacted by an attorney representing someone named Thomas Whitfield." "Does that name mean anything to you?" I frowned. "No. Is he a relative?" "He claims to be your half-brother." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "That's impossible. I'm an only child. According to this attorney, Thomas is your father's son from a relationship before he married your mother. He's 38 years old, lives in Seattle, and has documentation supporting his claim. And Zara, he says he's also a victim of financial fraud committed by your father." That night I barely slept, my mind racing with questions. How could I have a half-brother I'd never known about? Why had my parents, especially my mother, hidden his existence from me my entire life? And what had my father done to him? The next morning I made a decision without consulting Victoria or even Marcus. I found Thomas Whitfield on social media and sent him a direct message introducing myself and suggesting we talk. Within an hour, he'd replied with his phone number. When I called, the voice that answered was deep and held a slight Pacific Northwest accent, but there was something in the cadence, the way he pronounced certain words, that was unsettlingly familiar. "Zara," he said, after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. "I've known about you your entire life. I've seen pictures, followed your achievements from a distance. But our father made it very clear I was never to contact you." Why, I asked, struggling to process this new reality. "Your mother's condition for marrying him was that I would never be acknowledged. She didn't want his mistake interfering with their perfect family narrative." The bitterness in his voice was palpable, and I couldn't blame him. "Thomas, I had no idea you existed until yesterday. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it." "Call me Tom," he said, his tone softening slightly. "And I believe you. Our father is, well, manipulative, doesn't begin to cover it." Over the next hour, Tom shared his story. My father had maintained minimal contact with him throughout his childhood, paying court-ordered child support but never being truly present. When Tom turned 18 and was preparing for college, my father had approached him with what seemed like a generous offer he would pay for Tom's education in full if Tom would sign some paperwork. "I was young and desperate to go to college," Tom explained. "My mom was a teacher, making barely enough to cover our basic expenses, so I signed without reading the fine print." What he'd signed was similar to my power of attorney, but even broader in scope. My father had proceeded to use Tom's identity to secure business loans, and invest in high-risk ventures throughout the 1,990 seconds, ultimately filing for bankruptcy in Tom's name when those investments failed. Tom had discovered the fraud when he was 25, applied for a mortgage, and was denied due to the bankruptcy on his record. By the time I figured it all out and confronted him, the statute of limitations had passed for most of it, Tom said. He laughed in my face, Zara. Said it was the least I could do in exchange for the child support he'd paid. That if I caused trouble, he would make sure I regretted it. That sounds exactly like him, I said quietly. When I heard about your case through my attorney, we've been monitoring Richard Whitfield's legal troubles. It was like history repeating itself. Except you caught it sooner and you're fighting back. I never did. Would you be willing to testify? I asked. In the criminal case against our father, there was a long pause. I've spent 20 years trying to escape his shadow, build my own life. Going public means everyone would know. I understand if you can't, I assured him. No, he said finally. It's time. He shouldn't get away with doing to you what he did to me. I'll testify. The conference room at the district attorney's office was austere and impersonal, with fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across the faces of everyone present. District Attorney Maria Jimenez sat at the head of the table, flanked by two assistant prosecutors. Victoria sat beside me with Marcus on my other side for moral support. Across from us was Tom, whom I'd met in person for the first time just an hour earlier. The family resemblance was subtle but undeniable. The same set of the jaw, the same slight asymmetry to our smiles. It was like looking at an alternate version of myself, one shaped by different circumstances but springing from the same genetic source. Thank you all for coming, DA. Jimenez began, her voice brisk and authoritative. We've reviewed the evidence provided by Miss Whitfield's civil attorney, as well as the additional information from Mr. Thomas Whitfield. Based on our investigation, we're prepared to file multiple felony charges against Richard and Eleanor Whitfield. The prosecutor to her right, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, opened a folder. The charges will include identity theft, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, credit card fraud, and potentially RICO violations given the pattern of activity. RICO? I asked, surprised. Isn't that for organized crime? Racketeering charges apply to any ongoing pattern of illegal activity, Victoria explained. In this case, the systematic nature of the fraud across multiple victims and years could qualify. DA Jimenez nodded. Your parents didn't just commit isolated acts of fraud, Miss Whitfield. They established what amounts to a criminal enterprise, using the identities of family members to circumvent financial regulations and bankruptcy protections. Tom leaned forward. What about the statute of limitations for what they did to me? It's been almost 20 years. For some of the specific actions, the statute has indeed expired, the female assistant prosecutor acknowledged. However, under the continuing violations doctrine, we can include earlier actions as part of an ongoing pattern of behavior that continued with the more recent fraud against your sister. In plain English, DA, Jimenez added, we can tell the whole story, including what happened to you, Mr. Whitfield, as context for the current charges. The meeting continued with detailed discussions of evidence, potential penalties, and the timeline for arrests and prosecution. Throughout it all, I kept glancing at Tom, still struggling to integrate his existence into my understanding of my family. How many Sunday dinners had I sat through listening to my father pontificate about family loyalty while he had another child he'd abandoned and defrauded? As we were preparing to leave, DA Jimenez's assistant entered the conference room with an urgent expression. Excuse me, she said. We've just received information that Richard and Eleanor Whitfield purchased one-way tickets to Geneva, Switzerland. The flight leaves tomorrow morning. The room erupted in activity. DA Jimenez immediately began making calls to expedite the arrest warrants, while the assistant prosecutors huddled over their paperwork, making rapid adjustments to ensure everything was in order. Switzerland has an extradition treaty with the U.S., but it's notoriously difficult to extradite for financial crimes, Victoria explained to me as we watched the flurry of action. If they make it there with substantial assets, they could potentially live comfortably for years while fighting extradition. They're running, I said, the reality sinking in. They're actually going to try to flee the country rather than face what they've done. Tom, who had been quiet during this revelation, finally spoke. They've been running their whole lives. Running from responsibility, from consequences, from truth. It's who they are. Outside the district attorney's office, Tom and I stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, both unsure of the protocol for newfound siblings in the midst of a family criminal crisis. "Would you like to get coffee?" I finally asked. "I have so many questions." He nodded, a half smile lifting one corner of his mouth. "I've been waiting 28 years to have a conversation with my sister." "Coffee sounds great." At a nearby cafe over steaming mugs that neither of us seemed able to drink, we began the strange process of getting to know each other. Tom told me about his life in Seattle, where he worked as a software engineer. He'd been married briefly in his 20s, but was now divorced. The bankruptcy my father had caused in his name had haunted him for years, forcing him to rebuild his credit from scratch and delaying his career and personal goals. The worst part wasn't the financial damage, he confessed. It was knowing that my own father saw me as nothing more than a tool, a clean credit record he could exploit. That does something to you, makes you question your worth in a fundamental way. I reached across the table, impulsively squeezing his hand. "I understand that now. I keep thinking about all those years I believed in the perfect family myth, how proud I was to be a Whitfield. It was all a lie. Not all of it," Tom said thoughtfully. "You're still you. The achievements, the character you've built, those are real. Our father didn't give you those things. If anything, you succeeded despite him, not because of him." His words offered a perspective I hadn't considered, a way of separating my identity from the betrayal I'd experienced. We continued talking for hours, filling in the blanks in each other's understanding of our shared father and the parallel frauds he had perpetrated against his own children. When my phone rang, it was Victoria. "They got them," she said without preamble. "Richard and Eleanor Whitfield were arrested an hour ago while attempting to clear out a safety deposit box. Police found nearly $300, 0 inches cash, and several sets of falsified identification documents." After sharing the news with Tom, we sat in stunned silence for a moment. "It's really over," I finally said. "They're going to face justice. The legal part might be over soon," Tom replied. "But the rest of it, figuring out who we are beyond their lies, learning to trust again, that's just beginning." He was right, of course. The arrest of my parents marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another, more complex journey. As Tom and I walked back to our respective cars, we made plans to stay in touch, to build the sibling relationship we had been denied for nearly 3 decades. "Whatever happens with the trial," Tom said as we prepared to part, "we have each other now. They can't take that away from us." For the first time since discovering the mortgage fraud, I felt something like hope, not for reconciliation with my parents, which seemed impossible given their actions and lack of remorse, but for a new kind of family connection, one based on truth rather than facade. The weeks that followed brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings. My parents, denied bail due to their flight risk, remained in custody while their case progressed through the system. The story had attracted media attention, with several news outlets running features on the Whitfield family fraud, complete with analysis by financial crimes experts and psychologists specializing in family dynamics. Through it all, Marcus remained my rock, never once suggesting that the scandal and complications were too much for our relationship. Instead, He approached each new challenge with the same practical, supportive attitude, reminding me that this crisis didn't define me. You know, he said one evening as we walked along the Boston Harbor, when I asked you to check your credit report, I was thinking maybe we'd find a late payment or two that needed fixing. I never imagined uncovering all this. I laughed despite myself. Talk about opening Pandora's box. But here's the thing about that myth, he replied, stopping to face me. After all the troubles flew out, hope remained in the box. That's where we are now. The worst has been exposed, and what remains is hope for the future. Our future. He dropped to one knee right there on the harbor walk, pulling a small ring box from his pocket. I know we postponed the wedding plans because of all this, but I don't want to wait any longer. Whatever challenges come our way, I want to face them together, officially. Zara Whitfield, will you marry me? The ring was simple but elegant. Nothing like the ostentatious jewelry my mother had always favored. It was honest and real like Marcus himself. Yes, I said through tears. Absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized that despite everything my parents had taken from me, my credit, my trust, my illusions about my family, they hadn't managed to destroy my capacity for love or hope. In fact, their betrayal had ultimately led me to a stronger place, to deeper connections with Marcus and my newfound brother, to a clearer understanding of my own resilience. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 days before my parents' trial was scheduled to begin, when Victoria called with news that changed everything once again. They're taking a plea deal, she announced. Both of them. In exchange for reduced sentences. How reduced? I asked, my stomach tightening. Your father will serve 5 to 7 years, your mother 3 to 5. They've agreed to full financial restitution to both you and Tom, including surrendering all assets purchased with fraudulent funds. The plea deal meant no trial, no public testimony, no opportunity to confront my parents in court about everything they had done. But it also meant a guaranteed conviction, mandatory restitution, and the closure of knowing they would serve time for their crimes. There's one more thing, Victoria added. As part of the deal, they've provided information about similar frauds they committed against others. Others, I echoed. Who? Your maternal grandmother, for one. Apparently, they remortgaged her house without her knowledge shortly before she died. There are at least 3 more victims, all family members or close friends who trusted your parents implicitly. The scope of their betrayal expanded yet again, encompassing more lives than I had imagined. My parents hadn't just defrauded their children, they had systematically exploited everyone who trusted them, leaving a trail of financial and emotional devastation in their wake. The day my parents entered their guilty pleas, Tom flew in from Seattle to sit beside me in the courtroom. Together we watched as the judge accepted the plea agreement and set a date for sentencing. Neither of our parents looked in our direction, maintaining the fiction that they were the victims of ungrateful children, even as they admitted to multiple felonies. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters hungry for statements, Tom and I declined to comment. This part of the story was ending, but our recovery was just beginning, and that was a private journey, not fodder for news cycles or public consumption. That night, Tom, Marcus, and I had dinner together at our apartment, toasting with cheap champagne to new beginnings and hard-won wisdom. To the future, Tom said, raising his glass. And to family, the real kind built on truth and choice rather than obligation and lies. To justice, Marcus added. Long overdue, but finally served. I looked at these 2 men who had stood by me through the darkest revelation of my life, who had helped me find strength when my world was collapsing. To freedom, I said. From the past, from lies, from other people's definitions of loyalty, to writing our own stories from here on out. As our glasses clinked together, I felt something settle within me, not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. My parents had chosen their path prioritizing appearance and financial gain over authentic connection and basic human decency. Their choices had led them to prison and disgrace. My choice to pursue truth, to build genuine relationships, to define success by integrity rather than appearance, was leading me somewhere else entirely. Somewhere better. Somewhere real. 2 years have passed since my parents began serving their prison sentences. The Westport property was sold the mortgage satisfied, and my credit score has slowly begun to recover. Tom and I speak weekly, building the sibling relationship we were denied for so long. Last month, he stood as man of honor at my wedding to Marcus, a small, authentic celebration that focused on love rather than appearance. The financial betrayal my parents committed altered the course of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. What began as a devastating discovery of fraud ultimately led to freedom from the constraints of false expectations and superficial values. I learned that real family isn't defined by blood or last names, but by honesty, support, and mutual respect. Sometimes the most painful betrayals contain within them the seeds of our greatest growth. My parents took a $523,000 mortgage in my name without my knowledge, but what they unknowingly gave me was something far more valuable: the truth, and the chance to build a life on a foundation of authenticity rather than deception. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family betrayal or unexpected moments of justice in the comments below. Has karma ever caught up with someone who wronged you? How did you rebuild trust after a major betrayal? Don't forget to like this video. If you found value in my journey, subscribe to hear more real-life stories of resilience. Share with anyone who might be struggling with family complications of their own. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what we do to others, but what we do for ourselves, by breaking toxic cycles and creating something better.